Hey folks, this is Ben Yessel. I'm gonna try not to eat too much right now because I'm making a video, of course. I haven't made a video for a little bit. Been on vacation, lots of stuff going on. Um, I've also been on incidentally, an Asian dating site recently, so that's been interesting. I've met some pretty cool ladies, and it's just one of those things where you can't, I don't know, you can't always tell what's happening with the other person. If you're interested in them, so I don't know. It is what it is, but anyway. So more on that later if you guys are curious. Um, so I wanted to talk really quick about something that's on everybody's mind, of course, the Russia-Ukraine war, as well as the my perspective on, I guess, basically the United States versus Russia, and all kind of similar things. But I'll be talking about, again, all of my intuitions and knowledge of history and that sort of thing, and what will likely happen in the future, or what I think the United States should do, that sort of thing. So let's jump into this here. Sorry, one second here. I'm good. Okay. So, all right. Back, I suppose, this is going back to, if we're looking at the 1800s, which wasn't all that long ago. In the 1800s, the major powers in the world were, we'll just say later 1800s. So, like, not quite 1900 yet, but later 1800s. All the stuff leading up to World War One, or the times before World War One. The main powers in the world were Great Britain, right? Prussia, or I guess you say, yeah, it'd be Germany, basically. So, yeah, Great Britain, Germany, Russia was pretty powerful, and but maybe not quite as much as Germany or Great Britain, and kind of France, but France was not as powerful in general. And then also Turkey was pretty powerful, I think, the Ottoman Empire. Other than those countries, basically at this point, Eastern Asia was not really on the world stage so much. I mean, imagine that China and Japan were probably pretty powerful, along with India in their own respects. But in terms of military power, it was Germany and Great Britain and Russia and kind of France, and then, of course, the United States was a rising power. And so, as you can see, right off the bat, um, there were three countries, two in particular, that shared a lot of similar ethnic and cultural backgrounds, and are kind of bastions of democracy, I guess you'd say, of being Great Britain and the United States, with Germany being a, you know, kind of a third power that was, the United States and Great Britain thought well of Germany, of course, but Germany was a little bit different, a little bit more apt to what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe a little more ruthless in their own way. I should say, probably my own. Like, I'm probably part German ancestry-wise, but anyway. And then, Russia, even though Russia isn't all that much different from Germany, it's definitely in a different arena compared to United States, Great Britain and Germany. That being the biggest by far, most powerful of all the Slavic countries. And they also looked eastward into Asia, in the stands and whatever. And so, and then the Ottomans were kind of another kind of power that was not too, I mean, it's bordering Europe, that was kind of, you know, kind of competing with Russia and Germany. And the Ottomans were kind of, um, I think in general, kind of more friendly toward Germany. And a lot of it was because of this uneasiness about Russia. And everybody was uneasy about Russia. Even before the 1800s, um, well, before the 1800s, I think in general, um, you don't really hear too much about Russian aggression. Um, and of any sort, you don't really hear about anything military. Well, there's a Swedish. I'm sorry, I take that back. There were wars between um, Sweden and Russia, and Poland and Prussia were involved. So there were wars, I suppose. It was just they're not often remembered um, very much. And Russia was not really an aggressor in those earlier times. The aggressor was more Prussia or Sweden. Russia was more of a defender. So, and then of course, before then, you eventually get to the Mongol horde that basically stopped being a power really in Russia in the 1500s, 14, 1500s. So, um, but yeah, Russia was in a different place in a lot of respects compared to the rest of Europe. Um, Most of the rest of Europe was um, making a lot of progress in terms of, for the most part. There was just a lot more communication with the rest of the world and a lot more trade with the rest of the world. Even though Russia had the land bridge, or was connected landwise to Asia. Um, Russia just kind of wanted more for themselves and in more obvious ways. Whereas if the West was like that, they were much sneakier about it. I think Gorbachev once said that the British were kind of like sneaky little devils. You know, I think he meant that more in a good way. But there are a lot of sneaky little things that Britain has pulled. Some of them not so humorous, I suppose. But anyway, but before World War One, the most of the powers of the world were kind of not viewing Russia. Increasingly, there was a little bit more suspicion um, because Russia had grown quite a bit after the Mongols had retreated back to Mongolia. Russia was like, "Hey, free territory. We're going to go eastward now. We're going to get more powerful with Catherine the Great and stuff." So they retook a lot of basically all the Mongol territories, plus like even northernmost Siberia and stuff. Um, And I'm mentioning all this, and I could mention more, but all of this history is important to know about, and I think a lot of professors of history, a lot of people, teachers of history, would agree with me that the more you know about all this stuff, the more you can make sense of what's happening right now. And so, by the time I get to World War One, this was right, I think, when Russia went from being a monarchy with the Romanovs to communism. And World War One was kind of small potatoes, of course, compared to World War Two. But World War One had Turkey, Germany, and Austria, I believe, that were all kind of on the same team, or Austria-Hungary, or whatever. Involved something having to do with an assassination of somebody in the Balkans, Serbian guy, and then they all kind of, the Allied powers jumped on the bandwagon, in Europe at least. Woodrow Wilson, of course, didn't want to get involved up until, I guess, he was had to. The one country in Europe that the United States feels the most allied with, because again, there's ethnic reasons, ethnic similarities, at least with Anglo Americans, or in others as well. Actually, a lot of African Americans have also some English ancestry, or Scotch, especially, or Irish, or everybody. So it's kind of like there's a there's a profoundly deep connection between the United States and Great Britain. So if there's any country in Europe that's going to draw us into those wars, it would have been Britain, because we want to help Britain. And we all know Germany lost, and after they lost, they had a miserable time of it, and they were just hurting economically for a while. So then, of course, we know what happened with World War II, and we won again. And then Germany was like, "Okay, all right, we have been defeated officially. We are going to stop trying this world domination thing." And then, of course, Russia was in a great position because Russia had built up its forces, and it was kind of looking pretty strong. Communism had been going on for a while. There was a strong central government. Stalin was pretty ruthless. They Communism always wants people to believe, everybody to believe the world over, that everything is pretty hunky dory in their country. Come to our country, it's great, we're the best. But China is more that way. Russia was pretty obviously just about military power always, and don't mess with us and stay out of our sphere of influence. And Russia's this is once you have this post World War II thing, especially, you really have the groundwork for what started happening between the West and Russia, especially after World War II. Germany was, being in the middle of Europe somewhat. Again, it's always been kind of, Great Britain and the United States have viewed Germany favorably, but we've known that, we know on some level that Germany is, I'm trying to think, has lethal power, is one of the, you know, clearly, I mean, they're getting militarized right now. They're going to be, along with the United States and China. I mean, they might beat out Russia. If they get nukes, especially Germany could be, and they'll beat out India. They'll beat out France and Britain. Germany is just powerhouse economically, especially, and they're going to spend military wise. They're going to spend. The reason why, of course, is the Russia-Ukraine conflict. But Germany, because Germany was divided in after World War II, and West Germany was favorable to the West, and East Germany very reluctantly was favorable to Russia, but not really. But it was Russia's sphere of influence. And we know how Russia was. Russia was like, this is our territory now. We are doing things our way. And whereas France and Britain and the United States are like, wait, no, come on now. West Germany, Germany lost. We're trying to build the country up again. Germany should be a democracy. So, and then we saw the differences in wealth between West and East Germany. All these things I was taught, by the way, when I was younger. These are things that are glorious and good about the United States and bad about Russia. And a lot of it wasn't just the financial differences between the West and Russia or Eastern European countries. It was also, democracy and liberty is righteous and communism is evil. And there's definitely there's a lot of truth to that. It's just that what often happens with democracy is it also can foster evil, whereas if you have the right leader with communism, it depends on how they run it, but ultimately, because communism takes away freedoms from people, it's worse than democracy. But democracy is not without its flaws. But it was a good idea to begin with Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels and stuff. But very difficult to put in practice. This whole idea of everybody's the same, because it's not going to be that way. The people that are leaders are going to want always more for themselves. But the Russians sometimes are very sensitive, of course, to talk to them some about how we see ourselves as being the best and we're the righteous ones, and bow down before the United States and Russia's the evil one. Of course, they would be sensitive and they wouldn't feel good about that. There's probably a lot of mixed feelings in Russia about all this stuff. And Putin brought a lot of prosperity to Russia. The problem with Russia is that they haven't really had a long stretch of democracy that was very, very particularly successful. And we can't really include Putin in this because Putin is, again, more of a tyrant. And there are other things too. Russia, like Germany, was a bit more warmongery, where in the past Britain and France went through those stages, and I think they're largely done with that way of being. I could mention things like the Illuminati and how they also operate in secret, and that they are one of the big reasons why I cannot always ally myself with the West as strongly as some, because the Illuminati is essentially in control of the Western powers. But if, to the extent that we don't ever support immoral wars, and I want to be a patriotic American, and I just don't want to ever support the Illuminati, who, in case anybody's wondering about how real these guys are, the Illuminati are among the wealthiest families, most powerful families militarily, because they control stuff. The most wealthiest and powerful families in the West. They have connections with the Black Pope in Rome, and the Jesuit Order. They have connections with many other European orders, and I guess you could say Knights Templar and all this stuff. They have connections with the Bohemian Grove and the Skull and Bone Society in Northeast United States, Yale. And they have connections with the Trilateral Commission and the Bilderberger Group and the Council on Foreign Relations and the World Trade Organization. And there's some other ones too. The Trilateral Commission, I might have mentioned. Yeah, the Trilateral Commission. They have people in charge of all, in their group in all those places. And Henry Rockefeller is a full-fledged member of the Illuminati. We were taught that he was great with, being head Secretary of State and working on, meeting with Russian heads of state, and he was a tough talker and stuff. Well, the thing is that, to back up here for a second, and Russians that are watching this, they might know this already on some level, but because you had, in modern times, such a conglomeration of power, military power, enough population to be powerful. You also had the power that came from the righteousness of many of its citizens, and trade, and all this other stuff. You have a concentration of power with the United States, Great Britain, and Germany, with the United States being eventually the leader, right? And because you had all this good stuff going on, you had this evil group that was able to form in secret among some of the wealthiest people in these countries, and they basically hijacked all the Western governments. And they did that via basically monetary means and secrets and secret societies, and kind of making sure that nobody was ever able to trace any bad things that happened to them. There's always some other group, some other isolated group, which so that's the Illuminati. A little bit about the Illuminati, and they operate in secret, and they have become. This was all kind of formed in modern times, right around the World War I time period, when it's something having to do with the banks, the getting off the gold standard, and letting the Federal Reserve kind of be the way it is. But really, it was the Illuminati's been a bit more obvious bit by bit ever since World War II. More obvious to Eisenhower, more obvious to Kennedy and Nixon, and everybody else after that. And the presidents have been some of them have been trying to do good despite having to work with the Illuminati. The Illuminati has ultimate power. They decide what's really going on. And if they like what's happening in Russia or China, cool. It might not always mean that they don't want more. It might mean, though, that, well, I don't know. The social credit thing. in China. It's going to be a very similar thing with the West, because the Illuminati they're opposed to Christianity. They're opposed to anybody who fears God uh, and worships God and wants to be a good person and wants to be free. The Illuminati wants more for themselves and less for everybody else. It's the same thing with governments in general, but with the Illuminati, you have a lot more of a really specifically. Um, I wouldn't even use pagan. I'll just use or cult. I'll just use. They just worship Satan, or they worship money. They worship the pleasures of life. They worship power. And Satan will bring these things to them. You hear a lot about the Illuminati, maybe on YouTube, regarding rap music or popular music right now. Sure, but that's just one little snippet of their. I mean, they're everywhere. They're in the news. When people point the finger at the United States for bad things that have happened to their country, it's the Illuminati. The American people we've never had any say in all the things that the CIA does, or all the things that any of our armed forces do. And a lot of armed forces people they've done stuff under orders, and then they go back home, and some of them have decided they hate the military. They don't want anything to do with them anymore. I mean, there's a lot of unjust things that have happened because of the Illuminati. Because whenever there's a war, the people that own the weapons companies or anything else, any other kind of company that is involved with vehicles or weapons, military weapons, they're always going to make money because they have people in their society that are at the heads of those companies sometimes. And so you get a real conglomeration again of power, financial power, political power, media power, all this stuff. This is all happening in the West. This doesn't have as much to do with Russia. Russia is Putin was trying to get more affluent. He was trying to make these changes, become more capitalist, while still but the Russians are used to having kind of a tyrant in power, or at least one person in power. Britain and the United States have always been among the most democratically minded of nations, comparatively. So we see still, not only ethnically, the Celts and Germans teaming up against the Slavs, or in other words, Western Europe, the United States, and their friends like Japan and Korea teaming up against Russia, and China's with Russia. Not only do we see that, we see the U.S. military particularly, but it's all the militaries that are led by the U.S. Every single one of them in Europe, especially surrounding Russia, except it's all of Europe is pointing their stuff at Russia. They're like, okay, we're ready for it. They're expecting an invasion, because Russia clearly wants not only the Ukraine but a lot of other of its former territories as well. They want to be great again, but they want to do it in a way that's very military oriented. So the things that are going on that are bad are very obvious on the part of Russia, but the things that are going on that are very bad that are not as obvious are the United States and the Illuminati. It's a tricky thing. I was always on the side of Ukraine. I thought it was a very unjust war, but Russia defended it because they saw the United States, the sphere of influence of the United States is getting bigger and bigger, and just getting really close to the borders. Well, I mean, it's just that it's very clear. It should be very clear to people that this is not necessarily the kind of sentiment that is without some kind of deception. But the United States isn't completely blameless either. The USA, the white settlers pushed the American Indians back, but most of the American Indians were killed by disease. Right? But we basically Russia accuses us of getting really big. We took the land, and we just were like, okay, it's ours now. But I don't know. I like what the United States was, and even though I feel bad about what happened to American Indians, very much so. Um, it was a good thing. It's if one is more I guess you could say sympathetic to all things Anglo-American in terms of values, or if one comes from a heritage where those things are praised and valued, then it's likely that you're going to feel positive about the United States in terms of the westward movement and growth and stuff. So just something to keep in mind. Um, Likewise, when the Russians spread into east of the Urals, um, I don't know of anything really all that bad that happened. Although they took over the areas and became, Russia. All the native folks, the Yakutsk, I think that was pretty peaceful takeover. I don't think those tribes really ever minded so much being a part of Russia. Uh, because I think the Russians kind of left them alone, more or less, or they just, hardly anybody was living in these areas, and so Russia's like, yep, it's ours. China didn't want anything to do with it. Mongolia had its limits as far as how much Mongolia would want to go north. Japan had its limits, wanted just the islands. Same, so um, let me think here. So many differences between Russia and the United States. Things that are very irreconcilable. You would think that it's almost as bad as, in some respects, as now as, I mean, we were getting along so well, and then this happened, all this stuff. I thought we were getting along well. There are many Russians that I get along well with, of course, personally, but in terms of the nations, I thought the United States and Russia would be okay. There was a feeling that there was going to be a unilateral world. The United States was going to be the clear power. Well, there's China, then there's Russia, but then also there's Germany. So that kind of rising star there. Germany's militarizing because, again, of Russia's actions. If Germany wasn't a world power, if it wasn't as strong as it was, things would have been a lot different in the European world and stuff. Uh, so, how can we fix this stuff? How can we, knowing all this history, knowing the Slavs being, at least Russians being, uh, and West just going, what the heck, Russia? What did we do to you? You need to get your missiles away from our borders. The standoffishness, the what's mine is mine thing with Russia, and it's again, West is very sneaky about increasing their power, and that's what Russia seems to be all about, is checking that power. Russia and China. So, how can we remedy the situation? How can we fix all this stuff? Well, like any conflict, you need unselfishness. You need people to listen, genuinely listen. But you need unselfishness. You need to negate the differences between the two countries, the two cultures, and you have to don't stop killing each other. Stop killing each other. Let's just hear each other out. See what kind of, if you make any compromises. See what you guys really want. See if we can give you what you want. That'll be expensive of any other nation. If what you want is unreasonable, then it has to be war. But I wonder about the Illuminati, because I don't ultimately I don't want war, and I want people to stop fighting, and I want righteousness to prevail in the world. In order for that to happen, you have to have people that are unwilling to go to war, but they'll defend their country, but not fond of war. They don't go to war readily. I mean, it's very extremely reluctant to go to war. It's like the last option. We need we need more people that are that way. We need more people that are um, going to see the humanity in every nation, and the more of it, the better. Because in the military, you're taught to kill. It's we need that's a reason for that, but we need the opposite feeling um, in the world, particularly between Russia and the United States. If Russia is going to stop being aggressive and standoffish, then the West we need to check the Illuminati. We need to get rid of the Illuminati. We need, we need to get rid of the whole system. I think the only solution, really, to long term solution to Russia and its issues has to do with the Illuminati, checking the Illuminati's power. Um, yeah, it's like I say, it's complicated, but we want to be able to defend the United States, but it's America. We want to defend the United States and Britain and other countries we're close to, democracy, but we don't want to have anything to do with the Illuminati. And so the tricky thing is again finding those guys out, taking away their power. Okay, you guys take care. Catch you soon. Bye.